This video covers the following topics. First, we will give a general introduction. Then, we will explain each point in detail. Cone of vision is a term that refers to the range of vision that an observer can see naturally in perspective drawing. Field of view is a term that refers to the range that the eye or camera can see at once, expressed as an angle. For one-point perspective, it is recommended to keep the cone of vision within 40 to 50 degrees. For two-point perspective, it is recommended to keep the cone of vision within 60 degrees. For three-point perspective, it is also recommended to keep the cone of vision within 60 degrees. I will explain a misunderstanding from the previous video. For example, I thought that a width of 800 would form a 90-degree cone of vision, and that a width of 400 would form a 45-degree cone of vision, but that was a misunderstanding. Upon measuring properly, it turned out that a 53-degree cone of vision was formed on a square canvas. However, in the case of A4 size, a 45-degree cone of vision was formed. I will explain how to fit a specific cone of vision within a specific canvas. One method is measuring with a protractor. Simply place a protractor over the position of the SP and extend lines to the specified angles from there. However, this method has the problem that you cannot fit a specific cone of vision within the canvas size you set. Another method is lowering the SP. First, let's look at the case of a square canvas. 45-degree dp equals h or w times 2.4. Alternatively, 45-degree dp equals h or w plus h or w times 2 divided by 3 times 2 can be used. If choosing the latter, it can be approximated with h or w times 2.33. The accuracy of either is not considered here. 50-degree dp equals h or w times 2.1. 60-degree dp equals h or w times 1.7. If the canvas size is 400 times 400 and you want to perfectly fit a 45-degree cone of vision within the screen, the dp would be at a position of 400 times 2.4, which is 960 pixels. When calculating using the formula 45-degree dp equals h or w plus h or w times 2 divided by 3 times 2, the position of dp is approximately 933. Both calculations form an almost 45-degree cone of vision. If you want to completely cover the screen with the cone of vision, use the following formula: x equals square root width squared plus height squared. For a 400 times 400 canvas, x equals square root 400 to the power of 2 plus 400 to the power of 2, which is approximately 565. Then, by multiplying this 565 by 2.4, you arrive at a new dp of 1356. This allows for the construction of a cone of vision as shown in the diagram. In this case, the position of the SP is lowered while maintaining the same field of view. There is no distortion, but it may give the impression of being farther away from the subject on the screen. This can be summarized as follows. 1. Cases where the entire screen is contained within an arbitrary cone of vision. 2. Cases where a portion of the screen is contained within an arbitrary cone of vision. These two options are available. In the case of covering everything, it is necessary to consider a square that completely encloses the screen and to set the dp according to that square. The calculation formula for the maximum circle within the screen has already been provided. If finer adjustments are needed, tools like a protractor can be used for construction. In cases where the canvas screen is rectangular, one scenario is when the entire screen is contained within an arbitrary cone of vision. X equals square root width squared plus height squared. You can apply the value of x obtained from this formula back into the calculation formula for the arbitrary cone of vision. Cases where a portion of the screen is contained within an arbitrary cone of vision. For example, if one side of the maximum width of a rectangular screen is denoted as y, you can consider a case where a y times y square is set to fit within the arbitrary cone of vision. In this case, you would apply y back into the calculation formula for the arbitrary cone of vision. Cases where the entire screen is contained within an arbitrary cone of vision of 45 degrees. For an A4 size 595 times 842. Calculation formula: x equals square root 595 to the power of 2 plus 842 to the power of 2. X equals 1031. 1031 times 2.4 equals 2474. Cases where a part of the screen is contained within an arbitrary cone of vision of 45 degrees. For an A4 size 595 times 842. Calculation formulas. 595 times 2.4 equals 1428. 842 times 2.4 equals 2021. When everything is illustrated simultaneously, it looks like this. The question here is how much of the screen is to be contained within the cone of vision. Here is a comparison diagram of a 45-degree cone of vision for a 595 times 595 area and a 45-degree cone of vision for a 1031 times 1031 area. In the case of a 595 times 595 45-degree cone of vision, it is approximately contained within a 60-degree cone of vision. Exceeding this would be considered a limit case where distortion occurs. We are primarily faced with these four options. 1. One option is to enclose only a portion of the scene in a large and vivid manner, which results in a natural-looking image. 2. Another option is to enclose the entire scene in a small and dull manner, which also results in a natural-looking image. 3. A third option is to enclose the entire scene in a small and dull manner, but this time resulting in an unnatural-looking image. 4. The final option is to create a composition that allows the entire scene to be enclosed in a large and vivid manner. This is the image when represented as a diagram. I will explain the difference between the field of vision and the cone of vision. As explained in the previous video, we can think of the screen as being divided into a large field of vision and a specific canvas. Field of vision is a term that refers to the area that can be seen when looking in a particular direction. The large field of vision does not fundamentally overlap with the entire range that can be seen naturally. In other words, it includes the concept of areas that appear unnatural, blurry, or distorted at the periphery. Field of view is a term that refers to the range that the eye or camera can see at once, expressed as an angle. It is said that the maximum field of view for humans is around 100 degrees, while the effective field of view is approximately 35 degrees to the left and right. This so-called effective field of view is near the boundary of the area that appears natural. In the world of perspective, it is said to be around 30 degrees to the left and right. Cone of vision is a term that refers to the range of vision that an observer can see naturally in perspective drawing. It represents the visual field depicted by line art. It can also be treated synonymously with field of view. In essence, the cone of vision is an angular representation of the range within the field of vision or field of view where humans perceive things as particularly natural, further illustrated in the shape of a cone. A specific canvas needs to be constructed to align as closely as possible with this naturally visible range of vision. For example, the cone of vision with a 90-degree angle, using a diagonal distance point created previously at 45 degrees, can be illustrated in this way. It extends 45 degrees to the left and right, making it 180 minus 45 times 2 equals 90 degrees, which means it is a cone of vision of 90 degrees. I will explain clarifications of misunderstandings from the previous video. This time, I would like to delve into the points where I felt something was wrong, but I didn't quite understand where the mistakes were. I considered deleting the entire previous video, but since my videos are not a course that presents only correct answers, but rather a history of understanding, I believe that mistakes can also lead to success. It should also help others who might make the same mistakes as I did. In my understanding, with a square canvas, I believed that half the width of the vanishing point along the diagonal at 45 degrees would perfectly fit within the cone of vision of 45 degrees. In other words, I thought that the length of the width was proportional to the size of the cone of vision. For example, if a width of 800 forms a 90-degree cone of vision, then a width of 400 would form a 45-degree cone of vision. This is where my misunderstanding lies. However, when I actually used a protractor to draw the lines, I realized that the cone of vision does not measure 45 degrees. I had experimented with the same thing a long time ago, but it seems I conveniently interpreted the results by assuming that the protractor was simply not matching up. The actual data obtained was approximately 63.5 degrees. So, 180 minus 63.5 times 2 equals 53, meaning that a cone of vision of about 53 degrees overlaps with a 400 times 400 canvas. When illustrated, it looks like this. Of course, since the cone of vision generally experiences minimal distortion when it is less than 60 degrees, this is not a significant issue. In fact, when creating a cube, no major distortions were observed. However, in one-point perspective, it is often recommended to have a cone of vision between 40 and 50 degrees, so the slightly larger angle becomes a personal concern for me. In this video, I will explore whether there is a way for a 45-degree cone of vision to perfectly align with this 400 x 400 screen. I will explain how to find the position where a 45-degree cone of vision fits on the screen. I created the 45-degree cone of vision using a protractor to see where it might be positioned. How can we ensure that this green circle fits perfectly within the screen? In the previous video, I determined the position of the SP by extending lines at a 45-degree angle from the equal position of the GL and PP. From there, I extended the lines to find the vanishing point of the diagonal. However, that does not mean the position of the diagonal vanishing point from the previous video was incorrect. The position of the diagonal vanishing point is accurate, and if the goal is to use it to draw a distortion-free cube, then it has been approximately successful. Let's change our perspective slightly and reconsider things. In the previous video, I determined the position of the station point based on the size of the canvas. This time, I will freely decide the position of the station point. First, let's consider the distance from the center of perspective. I will arbitrarily set this distance to 600 pixels for this example. So, it will look like this. The key point is that I have not yet determined the size of the screen. Once the 45-degree cone of vision is created, we can simply create the screen there. The position of the diagonal vanishing point is determined by the distance from the center of perspective to the station point. By extending a line at 45 degrees from the station point, the position where it overlaps with the line of the center of perspective, or the line of eye level, becomes the diagonal vanishing point. By using the position of the diagonal vanishing point from the center of perspective or the position of the station point as a reference, I can create a square and draw a circle inside it to form a 90-degree cone of vision. Next, it is necessary to fit the screen appropriately within the field of view, that is, inside the cone of vision. As previously calculated, by having the distance from the center of perspective to the station point, a cone of vision of approximately 53 degrees is formed. However, this time we want to create a screen that goes beyond just half that distance. Moreover, we aim to create a screen that perfectly fits within a 45-degree cone of vision. First, there is a straightforward method using a protractor. By extending lines at 67.5 degrees to the left and right from the station point along the line of eye level, we can create a 45-degree cone of vision. Once this is done, we can later set a square screen that covers this cone. For example, we can set the canvas to 500 x 500 pixels from this point. Looking for methods other than using a protractor. The distance from the center of perspective to the station point is 600. A 90-degree cone of vision is 1200 x 1200. A 53-degree cone of vision is 600 x 600. A 45-degree cone of vision is 500 x 500. If we want to perfectly fit the canvas size within the diagonal vanishing point of 45 degrees, what can we do? One possible idea is to extend the distance of the station point. In other words, this means adjusting the position of the diagonal vanishing point instead of the picture plane. When the picture plane is 500 x 500, the diagonal vanishing point comes to a position of 1200. This means we can assume it is approximately 2.4 times farther away. Applying this rule, if the picture plane is 400 x 400, we can estimate that the diagonal vanishing point will be at a position of 400 x 2.4 equals 960. Let's try creating it. First, we will make a canvas of 400 x 400. Next, we will create a 960 x 960 square and use that as the diagonal vanishing point. We will measure whether this picture plane of 400 x 400 fits perfectly within the 45-degree cone of vision using a protractor. As a result, it aligned closely with the line at 67.5 degrees on either side. This means it fits within the 45-degree cone of vision. 180 minus 67.5 times 2 equals 45. To summarize, for square canvases, 45-degree dp equals h or w times 2.4. 53-degree dp equals h or w times 2. Additionally, we will derive formulas for other angles that may be versatile, such as 40 degrees, 50 degrees, and possibly 60 degrees, which might not be commonly used in one-point perspective. I will explain how to find the position for a 50-degree cone of vision. The 50-degree cone of vision is approximately 576 times 576. Therefore, 1200 divided by 576 equals 2.083. We round it up to 2.1, as strict precision in units is generally not necessary unless in architecture. For square canvases, 50-degree dp equals h or w times 2.1. Assuming 50-degree dp equals h or w times 2.1, we will construct the screen. Let's set h to 400. Calculating gives approximately 840. We will set dp at this position. This brings it to a roughly correct position, meaning the 50-degree cone of vision aligns with the screen. I will explain how to find the position where the 60-degree cone of vision fits within the frame. For 60 degrees, it was approximately 710 times 710. Therefore, 1200 divided by 710 equals 1.69, and we will round it up to 1.7. In the case of a square canvas, 60-degree dp equals h or w times 1.7. Here is the image illustration. For 60 degrees, dp equals h or w times 1.7, and setting h to 400 gives approximately 680. This position sets dp at roughly the correct location, meaning the 60-degree cone of vision aligns with the screen. I will explain the calculation formulas for rectangular screens. Now, the question is whether these formulas also apply to a rectangle. The previously derived formulas are as follows. If the height is greater than the width, then dp equals 2w plus h. w if the width is greater than the height, then dp equals 2h plus w, h. Let's demonstrate this with an A4 size example. It is a canvas measuring 595 times 842. Using the formula dp equals 2w plus h minus w, we find dp equals 2 times 595 plus 842 minus 595, which equals 1437. When using a protractor to draw, it turns out that we arrive at a position for the visual cone that is surprisingly close to 45 degrees. Since 1437 divided by 595 equals 2.41, this approximates the 2.4 times formula. I might have misunderstood this calculation result before. The reason for this phenomenon will not be considered here, but various factors, such as the ratio of height to width, might be involved. However, there are tricky elements lurking in the visual cone of this rectangle. In short, the question is the visual cone elliptical? Given the properties of the visual cone, it seems that it should fit within a square. Therefore, we can speculate that the actual visual cone would look something like this. It would be a different case if we could construct an elliptical visual cone, but that is not the scenario we are considering this time. If we want to fit everything within a 45-degree visual cone, it may be necessary to use a slightly larger visual cone. For example, what adjustments are needed to ensure that an area of 842 times 842 fits entirely within a 45-degree visual cone? 45 degrees dp equals h or w times 2.4. Therefore, in the case of 842 times 842, dp should be at the position of 2020.8. Let's round it to 2021. When illustrated, it looks like this. Of course, if you want to completely fill the A4 size from corner to corner, a slightly larger visual cone would be necessary. This issue also applies to the square canvas size we discussed earlier. In other words, if you want to ensure that the edges are firmly contained within the 45-degree visual cone, a different calculation formula will be required. While the distortion is likely to be negligible when drawing, there may still be some who are concerned about it. Additionally, if you lower the viewpoint to compensate for this distortion, effectively enlarging the 45-degree visual cone itself, you may encounter a different sense of discomfort that isn't related to distortion. For example, considering a 1034 x 1034 perspective cone, it fits perfectly. To make this perspective cone 45 degrees, it is necessary to move the vanishing point of the diagonal again. 45 degrees dp equals h or w times 2.4. Therefore, the dp will be at the position of 1034 times 2.4 equals 2481.6. I will explain the formulas for the part and the whole. If you want to fit an A4-sized screen of 595 x 842 into a 45-degree visual cone, there are two options. 1. The case where the entire screen is contained within the 45-degree visual cone. 2. The case where only a part of the screen is contained within the 45-degree visual cone. If you choose option 1, you need to consider a perfect circle that completely fits the A4 size. Then, imagine a square that can contain that perfect circle. You just need to determine the position of the diagonal vanishing point from that square. In mathematical terms, it can be expressed as follows. Let the length of a side of the square that can contain the perfect circle be x, then x equals square root width squared plus height squared. For example, in the case of A4, x equals square root 595 to the power of 2 plus 842 to the power of 2. If you type square root 595 to the power of 2 plus 842 to the power of 2 equals into Google, the calculation result will come back immediately. The result is 1031. What I visually estimated to be 1034 earlier is actually 1031. 45-degree dp equals h or w times 2.4. Next, you should multiply that x times 2.4. Since x equals 1034, then 1034 times 2.4 equals 2481.6. You should create a canvas of 2481 times 2481, using this canvas as the reference. You can also round it up to 2482 if you prefer. All that's left is to set the vanishing point of the diagonal. I actually drew a cube, and I didn't notice any distortion. Returning to the original drawing screen, it looks like this. Next, we will look at the case of fitting a part of the screen within a 45-degree view frustum. Now, let's consider the case where only the square of the maximum width edge is fitted. In the case of A4 size 595 x 842, a 595 x 595 square fits within the 45-degree view frustum, while anything outside of this will extend beyond the boundaries. In the diagram, the area represented by the white diagonal lines falls outside the range of the 45-degree view frustum. 45-degree dp equals h or w times 2.4. Applying the formula, we have 595 times 2.4 equals 1428. Using this diagonal vanishing point, I attempted to draw a cube in the same manner as before. Indeed, when compared, it seems that fitting the entire screen neatly into a 45-degree cone of vision looks better. In particular, the edges appear to make the cube look slightly elongated. It's not an overwhelming sense of discomfort, but it is a bit noticeable. The overall case feels somewhat shorter, but this kind of perception should be honed by observing real objects. This is closely related to artistic sensibility. By the way, how much of the cone of vision extends beyond the partial area? This area corresponds to about a 60-degree cone of vision, so we can say that most of it fits within the 60-degree cone. Once it starts exceeding this cone, it surpasses 60 degrees, and the distortion becomes more pronounced. For example, if you draw a square in this area, it will likely appear distorted. After all, with one-point perspective, it might be safer to fit everything into a 45-degree or 50-degree cone of vision rather than just a part of it. With 2-point or 3-point perspective, even a 60-degree cone seems to work well. Although there's no absolute correct way in art, it's rare to draw something you want to emphasize in such a corner. If we assume the center will look more vivid, we might consider this a necessary compromise. I will explain what the angle of the cone of vision should be. According to Scott Robertson, the following angles provide a more natural image. For one-point perspective, it is recommended to keep the cone of vision within 40 to 50 degrees. If the cone of vision is too narrow, it will begin to resemble the effect of a telephoto lens. For two-point perspective, it is recommended to keep the cone of vision within 60 degrees. However, since distortion increases towards the edges, it's best to avoid placing important elements at the periphery. Typically, a 60-degree cone of vision is commonly used for this type of perspective. For three-point perspective, it is also recommended to keep the cone of vision within 60 degrees. The explanations for two-point and three-point perspectives will be covered in a separate video. I will explain what is gained by sacrificing distortion. Robbie Lee states that the position of the DP depends on how much you want to include in the drawing and how much distortion you are willing to tolerate. However, in most cases, it works well if you place the vanishing point about 2/3 of the screen's width from the edge. For example, in the case of 400 x 400, the DP would be at the edge of a canvas size of DP equals 400 plus 400 times 2 divided by 3 times 2. This gives approximately 933. When I actually created it, it resulted in an approximately 45-degree field of view. With more precise drafting, it seems possible to achieve an exact value, but it's fair to say that the range is roughly between 44 and 46 degrees. This calculation is also close to the 45-degree DP equals H or W times 2.4 formula, which in this case would yield 960, a difference of 27 from 933. Now, can this method be applied to an A4 size as well? Let's calculate using the width of 595 for a 595 x 842 canvas. Since DP equals W plus W times 2 divided by 3 times 2, the result is approximately 1388.3. When illustrated, it seems to fall within the 44 to 46 degree range, meaning it fits roughly within a 45-degree cone of vision. However, this applies to the partial case for the A4 size. The edges will exceed the 45-degree limit. However, this does not immediately mean that the drawing will look unnatural. If the edges are still approximately within 60 degrees, they will not create an excessively unnatural appearance. As Lee stated, we should prioritize how much distortion we are willing to accept. In the first place, if it were merely a matter of distortion, there would be no need for us to intentionally adopt a wide viewing cone. It would be better to position the DP so that the entire screen fits within a 45-degree or 50-degree viewing cone. For instance, one could calculate a circle using x equals square root width squared plus height squared. However, unfortunately, the issue of setting the viewing cone is not just about distortion. If we try too hard to correct the distortion, other aspects may negatively impact aesthetics or practicality. In the case of A4 size, calculations indicate that a canvas size of 1031 should be used as a standard. If using Robbie Lee's calculation method, the DP should be positioned at 2405, calculated as DP equals W plus W times 2 divided by 3 times 2. If using a factor of 2.4, it would be 2474. The issue of the visual cone can be described as a matter of the relationship between distortion and field of view. If we reduce the field of view in an attempt to minimize distortion, our visual range also becomes limited. For example, if there are 10 objects in front of us, a 45-degree visual cone may only allow us to depict 5 of them, while a 60-degree visual cone may allow for more. Additionally, simply moving the SP further away from the objects can indeed allow for a broader range to be captured, but at the expense of being able to see the details more closely. The appropriate range of the visual cone and the position of the station point when drawing is more complicated than one might imagine, and it can be said that there is no absolute answer to this issue. It can only be said that cases with obvious distortion are undesirable, unless, of course, the intention is to create distortion deliberately. In a natural range, various aspects such as how much distortion to allow, how much roughness in the artwork is acceptable, and how many elements to include are all tested against the creator's sense of aesthetics. It is a domain woven from experience and knowledge. One cannot arrogantly claim a definitive answer. What's important is to assist the creator in achieving the composition they envision. For example, if you are a photographer wanting to capture all the students in front of you in the viewfinder, you would zoom out if they don't fit in the frame. If you're too far away, you'd zoom in. If you're too close, you'd need to step back, and if you're too far, you'd move closer. This way, you adjust the distance and field of view. For example, if there are only 3 students, this composition would be acceptable. However, it seems that there are more students present. Let's try to address this by zooming out the camera. Zooming out essentially means widening the field of view, which enlarges the visual cone. To fit all 11 students into the viewfinder, the field of view needed to be adjusted from about 40 degrees to 104 degrees. Naturally, the edges will distort as a result. You might think there isn't much distortion. However, this is only because the cubes are overlapping, which softens the distortion. When you increase the distance, the distortion becomes more apparent. Now, in order to fit all 10 people without expanding the viewing cone, the viewpoint must be moved. This means the photographer needs to step back. I moved back about 50 meters along the y-axis. Alternatively, it is possible to physically reduce the scale of the students, although this is practically difficult. Another option might be to change their arrangement, such as creating a tiered stage to gather them together and achieve an angle that minimizes distortion. There are various options for fitting them into the frame without stepping back or widening the field of view. As a result of the photographer moving back, the image obtained shows that the distortion on the right side has been eliminated. However, the objects appear smaller, making the individual facial expressions of the students likely less visible. The difference between lowering the standing point and keeping the SP the same while widening the field of view lies in whether there is distortion. Both methods generally create a dull and distant appearance in the overall image. Both have a 40-degree visual cone, but the position of the standing point is closer on the left and farther on the right. When the size of the screen is specified in production, it can be a dilemma. One option is to enlarge the image on the right to match the size of the left cube, though this can be challenging if such a large image cannot be displayed side by side, so only part of it is arranged. We are primarily faced with these 4 options. 1. Enclose a large, vibrant portion and natural screen. 2. Enclose a small, dull entirety and natural screen. 3. Enclose a small, dull entirety and unnatural screen. 4. Structure the screen to enclose a large, vibrant whole. Such issues are more related to composition than to drawing itself. They are fundamentally tied to the core artistic question of what constitutes appropriate screen composition and structure. Finding a way to enclose the entire scene in a large, vibrant manner is challenging. While there may be methods like enlarging a screen that captures a small, dull entirety, I still struggle to visualize an effective composition. Certainly, it may appear to be of a similar size. However, when a painting is too large, we often find it difficult to perceive all elements correctly and aesthetically at once. Beauty is largely about balance. When taking photographs, there are significant limitations. However, for those who create objects freely in a painting, there is the freedom and dilemma of determining how many objects to place in an appropriate frame without forcibly expanding the canvas. This is an issue that should be considered at the design stage rather than simply zooming in or out on an already drawn picture. Please subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up.